Guys, hey everybody, I'm back. Alright, let me go live on these other platforms. Alright, cool. Alright, everybody, happy Wednesday. So it's our study group time, so we're reading this book. So that's what we're doing, guys. So if you're tuning in, wanting a reading, it's not going to happen just because this is our study group time, which means we're only doing a study group. So we're reading the book, and then we're discussing the content, and then we're also discussing spiritual topics and matters as well. So if you're tuning in because you would like to ask me a personal question, that was in the last hour. If you're tuning in because you want to connect with your loved one in spirit, that was in the last hour as well. So we're doing study groups. So this is what this is about. Study group. So that's what we're reading. All right. So let's see. I want to make sure. I love you too. All right. Just want to make sure say hi to everybody before I get going. Cool. Okay, cool. Awesome. All right. So I haven't been read this book in forever. I read this years ago. God, I don't even remember. I used to go to a cafe. Yes. Yeah. Brittany's like, I just ordered it from Amazon. I used to go to a cafe in Houston called Agora. It's one of my favorite cafes I used to go to, and I used to just hang out like for hours and hours and just read. And sometimes it was easier for me to read in like a coffee shop or in a cafe than like at home, because sometimes when I read at home I'll fall asleep, or I'll be like, oh, like I'm all, I'm all too comfortable, so it's hard to keep up with it. So sometimes I'll take myself to like a place that's more like active, and then I'll read there just because it's easier to stay focused. And not only that, because I suffer from ADD, or because I am diagnosed with ADD, I have to reread a lot of things like consistently. So I'll read something, and if I don't grasp it on my first try, I'll reread it again. And if I still get ADD is real, y'all. Like, it's a real thing. So, like, I'll be trying to read, and then my mind wanders. So even though I'm actually reading, I'm not aware of what I'm reading. My mind is thinking about random things. And then once I realize, oh crap, I'm not paying attention, then I have to bring my mind back to what I was reading and then reread it. And so I tend to do that a lot when I'm just reading by myself, just because it can become a very like monotonous process. But I enjoy reading. I love it. And so this book I haven't read in a long time. I remember when I first read it, it was very eye-opening for me in many ways. So let me go over to the right page here. Okay, so a lot of this has more to do with like consciousness and our state of being, and our conscious collective, and what's changing in the world, and just like shifting the trajectory of ourselves and where we want our lives to go, and all of that. Hello, Lynn. Thank you. I appreciate that. Maria Paula, thank you, sweetheart. I appreciate that. Brittany says, like, that happens to me all the time, and I love to read. Yeah, this is why I have to take my recommended dosage of Adderall. People always want to think of Adderall as like, oh, you're on like drugs. I'm like, I'm on Adderall because I have ADD that my doctor diagnosed me with. So he's trying to help me stay on track with what I want to do in this world, and with the work that I do. So on days that I work, because I don't like to be like a pill popper every day. So on days that I work, I take my Adderall because I need to, so I can get through my work day. On days that I don't work, I don't really take my Adderall just because I don't need it. And if I just can't concentrate, then I can't concentrate. So it is what it is. All right, so we're gonna start here. So this is chapter 1, page 1. I have a mint in my mouth, by the way, guys, just because the Adderall makes my tongue feel nasty, and it makes like this nasty taste in my mouth. So I sometimes pop a mint just to kind of kill it. Okay, evocation. Earth 100, and I think like in the first chapter he's kind of rambling on a little bit for the first part of it, so like it's going to seem a little bit ethereal in the way that he's talking about stuff. Just like ride along. We'll get to some good stuff, so ride along, okay? And guys, as you're hearing me read, and as we're reading and going through the content, if you want to ask me questions about the material or any spiritual topics or matters that we could tie in, feel free to do that. As long as they're not personal questions, because I'm not doing personal questions in this hour, but I'm definitely open to spiritual questions, because I'll come back and look at what you guys wrote, and then I will respond and give you my own take on stuff, okay? So, evocation. 114 million years ago, one morning just after sunrise, the first flower ever to appear on the planet opens up to receive the rays of the sun. Prior to this momentous event that heralds an evolutionary transformation in the life of plants, the planet had already been covered in vegetation for millions of years. The first flower probably did not survive for long, and flowers must have remained rare and isolated phenomena, since conditions were most likely not yet favorable for a widespread flowering to occur. One day, however, a critical threshold was reached, and suddenly there would have been an explosion of color and scent all over the planet. If a perceiving consciousness had been there to witness it, much later, I'm going to pass it on. If a perceiving consciousness had been there to witness it. Much later, those delicate and fragrant beings we call flowers would come to play an essential part in the evolution of consciousness of another species. Humans would increasingly be drawn to and fascinated by them. As the consciousness of human beings developed, flowers were most likely the first thing they came to value that had no utilitarian purpose for them. That is to say, was not linked to some way to survival. They provided inspiration to countless artists, poets, and mystics. Jesus tells us to contemplate the flowers and learn from them how to live. The Buddha is said to have given a silent sermon once, during which he held up a flower and gazed at it. After a while, one of those present, a monk called Mahakashyapa, began to smile. He is said to have been the only one who had understood the sermon. According to legend, that smile, that is to say, realization, was handed down by 28 successive masters and much later became the origin of Zen. Seeing beauty in a flower could awaken humans, however briefly, to the beauty that is an essential part of their own innermost being, their true nature. The first recognition of beauty was one of the most significant events in the evolution of human consciousness. The feelings of joy and love are intrinsically connected to that recognition. Without our fully realizing it, flowers would become for us an expression in form of that which is most high, most sacred, and ultimately formless within ourselves. Flowers, more fleeting, more ethereal, and more delicate than the plants out of which they emerged, would become like messengers from another realm, like a bridge between the world of physical forms and the formless. They not only had a scent that was delicate and pleasing to humans, but also brought a fragrance from the realm of spirit. Using the word enlightenment in a wider sense than the conventionally accepted one, we could look upon flowers as the enlightenment of plants. Any life form in any realm, mineral, vegetable, animal, or human, can be said to undergo enlightenment. It is, however, an extremely rare occurrence, since it is more than an evolutionary progression. It also implies a discontinuity in its development, a leap to an entirely different level of being, and, most important, a lessening of materiality. What could be heavier and more impenetrable than a rock, the densest of all forms? And yet some rocks undergo a change in their molecular structure, turn into crystals, and so become transparent to the light. Some carbons, under inconceivable heat and pressure, turn into diamonds, and some heavy minerals into other precious stones. Most crawling reptilians, the most earthbound of all creatures, have remained unchanged for millions of years. Some, however, grew feathers and wings and turned into birds, thus defying the force of gravity that held them for so long. They didn't become better at crawling or walking, but transcended crawling and walking entirely. Since time immemorial, flowers, crystals, precious stones, and birds have held special significance for the human spirit. Like all life forms, they are, of course, temporary manifestations of the underlying one life, one consciousness. Their special significance and the reason why humans feel such fascination for and affinity with them can be attributed to their the ethereal quality. Once there is a certain degree of presence of still and alert attention in human beings' perception, they can sense the divine life essence, the one indwelling consciousness or spirit in every creature, every life form, recognize it as one with their own essence and so love it as themselves. Until this happens, however, most humans see only the outer forms, unaware of the inner essence, just as they are unaware of their own essence and identify only with their own physical and psychological form. In the case of a flower, a crystal, precious stone, or bird, however, even someone with little or no presence can occasionally sense that there is more there than the mere physical existence of that form, without knowing that this is the reason why he or she is drawn to it, feels an affinity with it. Because of its ethereal nature, its form obscures the indwelling spirit to a lesser degree than is the case with other life forms. The exception to this are all newborn life forms, babies, puppies, kittens, lambs, and so on. They are fragile, delicate, not yet firmly established in materiality, an innocence, a sweetness, and beauty that are not of this world, still shine through them. They delight even relatively insensitive humans. So when you are alert and contemplate a flower, crystal, or bird without naming it mentally, it becomes a window for you into the formless. There is an inner opening, however slight, into the realm of spirit. This is why these three enlightened life forms have played such an important part in the evolution of human consciousness since ancient times. Why, for example, the jewel in the lotus flower is a central symbol of Buddhism, and a white bird, the dove, signifies the Holy Spirit in Christianity. They have been consciousness that is destined to take place in the human species. This is the spiritual awakening that we are beginning to witness now. The purpose of this book. Is humanity ready for a transformation of consciousness? An inner flowering so radical and profound that compared to the flowering of plants, no matter how beautiful, is only a pale reflection? Can human beings lose the density of their conditioned mind structures and become like crystals or precious stones, so to speak, transparent to the light of consciousness? Can they defy the gravitational pull of materialism and materiality and rise above identification with form that keeps the ego in place and condemns them to imprisonment within their own personality? The possibility of such a transformation has been the central message of the great wisdom teachings of humankind. The messengers, Buddha, Jesus, and others, not all of them known, were humanity's early flowers. They were precursors, rare and precious beings. A widespread flowering was not yet possible at that time, and their message became largely misunderstood and often greatly distorted. It certainly did not transform human behavior, except in a small minority of people. Is humanity more ready now than at the time of those early teachers? Why should this be so? What can you do, if anything, to bring about or accelerate the inner shift? What is it that characterizes the old egoic state of consciousness, and by what signs is the new emerging consciousness recognized? These and other essential questions will be addressed in this book. More important, this book itself is a transformational device that has come out of the arising new consciousness. The ideas and concepts presented here may be important, but they are secondary. They are no more than signposts pointing toward awakening. As you read, a shift takes place within you. This book's main purpose is not to add new information or beliefs to your mind or to try to convince you of anything, but to bring about a shift in consciousness, that is to say, to awaken. In that sense, this book is not interesting. Interesting means you can keep your distance, play around with ideas and concepts in your mind, agree or disagree. This book is about you. It will change your state of consciousness, or it will be meaningless. It can only awaken those who are ready. Not everyone is ready yet, but many are, and with each person who awakens, the momentum in the collective consciousness grows, and it becomes easier for others. If you don't know what awakening means, read on. Only by awakening can you know the true meaning of that word. A glimpse is enough to initiate the awakening process, which is irreversible. For some, that glimpse will come while reading this book. For many others who may not even have realized it, the process has already begun. This book will help them recognize it. For some, it may have begun through loss or suffering. For others, through coming into contact with a spiritual teacher or teaching, through reading The Power of Now or some other spiritually alive and therefore transformational book, or any combination of the above. If the awakening process has begun in you, the reading of this book will accelerate and intensify it. An essential part of the awakening is the recognition of the unawakened you, the ego as it thinks, speaks, and acts, as well as the recognition of the collectively conditioned mental processes that perpetuate the unawakened state. That is why this book shows the main aspects of the ego and how they operate in the individual as well as in the collective. This is important for two related reasons. The first is that unless you know the basic mechanics behind the workings of the ego, you won't recognize it, and it will trick you into identifying with it again and again. This means it takes you over, an imposter pretending to be you. The second reason is that the act of recognition itself is one of the ways in which awakening happens. When you recognize the unconsciousness in you, that which makes the recognition possible is the arising consciousness, is awakening. You cannot fight against the ego and win, just as you cannot fight against darkness. The light of consciousness is all that is necessary. You are that light. So let's stop there for a second because I want to comment on that here. So the idea of this book and what it's already presenting is the idea that if you understand the mechanism of the ego and if you acknowledge what is happening within you, then you become aware. You become self-aware enough, which is a common trait with people who are awakened. In other words, people who have already had one sort of awakening within their lives. The first awakening is when you realize that there's more to everything than what you are experiencing and how you're engaging with this reality. There's more to it than that. And so it's almost this awakening of this inner knowing that this is not all there is. What you experience and how you're engaging with the world is not all there is. So that's kind of like a first level awakening. When that starts to happen, people tend to go into a personality crisis or a crisis of faith, or they go into a crisis of conditioned being. When I say personality crisis, you can also count that as part of like a crisis of conditioned being, meaning that as we've grown up and been who we are, by our families, growing up in the environments that grew up in, the schools we went to, the people we were surrounded by, all of those interactions and all of those engagements have been part of the production of who we are today. And in other words, those experiences us to become who we are today, whether by choice or by force. And so that's one level of it. And then also our faith. If we grew up in an environment or in a family that had a established faith, regardless of the religious belief, then you were also conditioned in the mindset and from the perspective of that faith. So all of that is a part of who we are. All of that produces us as an individual. But when you start to realize, some people, if they've tried to make life work for them and they've done everything that they were supposed to do and it didn't work out, that will create a crisis of self, a crisis of faith, either through the understanding that you're supposed to be fine and God's not supposed to let anything happen to you. And if it does happen to you or you experience something, then it can shatter your belief system. if you've been working your entire life to be an attorney and you've done everything you were supposed to do, and then something happens and you lose your license and can never practice being an attorney, then that's also a crisis of like faith or being, because you did all that work and then this is what ends up happening. And so whenever we're forced into situations like that, I have a client who I talked to earlier, and he has always been a very strong person. He's always been the person that's the go-to, that people take care of. Very similar to my assistant Roxy. And he got COVID last year, and it took him like 7 or 8 months to recover from that. And so he just never thought that he would ever find himself in that kind of situation, or he would ever be at a disadvantage like that, because that's not what he was used to. And so that was a crisis of faith and a crisis of self. He had to understand this world and this reality in a very different way. So whenever we have those kinds of experiences, they aren't always, even though they may be very challenging and difficult to go through, they can also be incredible opportunities to understand ourselves in a way we had never considered before. It can give us an opportunity to see this reality in a very different way. And if we've been very attached to our physicality, whether it be the physicality of our things, the physicality of our family and people around us, or the physicality of our bodies or what we do, it will force us, if that is something's happened or changed, then it forces us to reassess who we are in this reality. And by doing so, you become self-aware. You start to pay attention to who you are and how you're operating. And being aware of the ego's mechanism, because the ego is simply a tool. It's something in your mind, it's something in your being that helps you to maintain and retain a sense of a self rooted in this reality. And so the goal of the ego, the job of the ego, is to maintain that perspective, that persona. And if something happens and the ego can't keep its hold on your perspective, on your mind, on your energy, then there's an expansion that takes place. And then there's this back and forth that starts to happen there, because you start to fight with yourself, trying to figure out who you are and what you're here for. Because what you thought you were here for is no longer befitting of you. So they're talking about the idea of like the ego being this thing that, is a trickster, and it's going to draw you in and suck you in. And to some extent, I agree with that, because that's its job. Its job is to keep us fixated on the things that it is supposed to keep us fixated on. But I don't ever associate the ego with like this evil thing, because it's there for a reason. It serves its purpose, but sometimes we give it way too much space. Think of the ego as like a dog, and the dog it's like it goes off and it does its own thing, and it's constantly trying to engage and do stuff and etc. So whenever you are trying to stop the ego from dominating your human experience, you're basically placing limits. What I say is, don't kill the dog, just give it a gate. Just put it inside of an area that's gated, and you can help to control and help to direct how you'll use it. So if you have an unruly dog, the ego, then instead of trying to stop it from acting so unruly, instead of trying to force it into submission, which its job is to not submit, instead of trying to destroy the ego, which a lot of people try to do, I just say build a little playpen and let it run around whenever it needs to run around, and then after that bring it back in, because once it gets tired, then it's no longer going to fight. So let's go back to this. Our inherited dysfunction. I'm on page 8. If we look more deeply into humanity's ancient religions and spiritual traditions, we will find that underneath the many surface differences, there are two core insights that most of them agree on. The words they use to describe those insights differ, yet they all point to a twofold fundamental truth. The first part of this truth is the realization that the normal state of mind of most human beings contains a strong element of what we might call dysfunction, or even madness. Certain teachings at the heart of Hinduism perhaps come closest to seeing this dysfunction as a form of collective mental illness. They call it Maya, the veil of disillusion. Ramana Maharshi, one of the greatest Indian sages, bluntly states, the mind is Maya. Buddhism uses different terms. According to the Buddha, the human mind in its normal state generates dukkha, which can be translated as suffering, unsatisfactoriness, or just plain misery. He sees it as a characteristic of the human condition. Wherever you go, Whatever you do, says the Buddha, you will encounter dukkha. And it will manifest in every situation sooner or later. According to Christian teachings, the normal collective state of humanity is one of original sin. Sin is a word that has been greatly misunderstood and misinterpreted. Literally translated from the ancient Greek in which the New Testament was written, to sin means to miss the mark, as an archer who misses the target. So to sin means to miss the point of human existence, which is what I mentioned to you guys before, what the real meaning of the word sin was. This is the second time I remember reading this. I don't remember I heard it from, I realized that back when I was questioning my entire faith. So that was years before I read this book. I didn't even realize that it even brought it up, that it actually gives you the correct interpretation of the word sin. So going back to this, literally translated from the ancient Greek in which the New Testament was written, this to sin means to miss the mark, as an archer who misses the target. So to sin means to miss the point of human existence. It means to live unskillfully, blindly, and thus to suffer and cause suffering. Again, the term, stripped of its cultural baggage and misinterpretations, points to the dysfunction inherent in the human condition. The achievements of humanity are impressive and undeniable. We have created sublime works of music, literature, painting, architecture, and sculpture. More recently, science and technology have brought about radical changes in the way we live and have enabled us to do and create things that would have been considered miraculous even 200 years ago. No doubt, the human mind is highly intelligent, yet its very intelligence is tainted by madness. Science and technology have magnified the destructive impact that the dysfunction let me go back to that. Yet its very intelligence is tainted by madness. Science and technology have magnified the destructive impact that the dysfunction of the human mind has upon the planet, other life forms, and upon humans themselves. That is why the history of the 20th century is where that dysfunction, that collective insanity, can be most clearly recognized. A further factor is that this dysfunction is actually intensifying and accelerating. You don't think, really? You think so? This book was written, because this book is from the early 2000s. So this has been a hot while since this book was out. So you got that right. Definitely accelerating and intensifying. The First World War broke out in 1914. Destructive and cruel wars motivated by fear, greed, and a desire for power had been common occurrences throughout human history, as had slavery, torture, and widespread violence inflicted for religious and ideological reasons. Humans suffered more at the hands of each other than through natural disasters. By the year 1914, however, the highly intelligent human mind had invented not only the internal combustion engine, but also bombs, machine guns, submarines, flamethrowers, and poison gas. Intelligence in the service of madness. In static trench warfare in France and Belgium, millions of men perished to gain a few miles of mud. When the war was over in 1918, the survivors looked in horror and incomprehension upon the devastation left behind. 10 million human beings killed and many more maimed or disfigured. Never before had human madness been so destructive in its effect, so clearly visible. Little did they know that this was only the beginning. By the end of the century, the number of people who died a violent death at the hand of their fellow humans would rise to more than 100 million. They died not only through wars between nations, but also through mass exterminations and genocide, such as the murder of 20 million class enemies, spies, and traitors in the Soviet Union under Stalin, or the unspeakable horrors of the Holocaust in Nazi Germany. They also died in countless smaller internal conflicts, such as the Spanish Civil War or during the Khmer Rouge regime in Cambodia. when a quarter of that country's population was murdered. We only need to watch the daily news on television to realize that the madness has not abated, that it is continuing into the 21st century. Another aspect of the collective dysfunction of the human mind is the unprecedented violence that humans are inflicting on other life forms and the planet itself. The destruction of oxygen-producing forests and other plant and animal life, ill treatment of animals in factory farms, and poisoning of rivers, oceans, and air. Driven by greed, ignorant of their connectedness to the whole, humans persist in behavior that, if continued unchecked, can only result in their own destruction. The collective manifestations of the insanity that lies at the heart of the human condition constitute the greater part of human history. It is to a large extent a history of madness. If the history of humanity were the clinical case... Oh, let me put on my battery because my thing's about to go off. Please hold. Forgot that I left my MacBook. Okay, there we go. Now it's charging. The collective manifestations of the insanity that lies at the heart of the human condition constitute the greater part of human history. It is to a large extent a history of madness. If the history of humanity were the clinical case history of a single human being, the diagnosis would have to be chronic paranoid delusions, a pathological propensity to commit murder, and acts of extreme violence and cruelty against his perceived enemies. His own consciousness projected outward. Criminally insane with a few brief lucid intervals. Fear, greed, and a desire for power are the psychological motivating forces not only behind warfare and violence between nations, tribes, religions, and ideologies, but also the cause of incessant conflict in personal relationships. They bring about a distortion in your perception of other people and yourself. Through them, you misinterpret every situation, leading to misguided action designed to rid you of fear and satisfy your need for more, a bottomless hole that can never be filled. It is important to realize, however, that fear, greed, and the desire for power are not the dysfunction that we are speaking of, but are themselves created by the dysfunction, which is a deep-seated collective delusion that lies within the mind of each human being. A number of spiritual teachings tell us to let go of fear and desire, but those spiritual practices are usually unsuccessful. They haven't gone to the root of the dysfunction. Fear, greed, and desire for power are not the ultimate causal factors. Trying to become a good or better human being sounds like a commendable and high-minded thing to do, yet it is an endeavor you cannot ultimately succeed in unless there is a shift in consciousness. This is because it is still part of the same dysfunction, a more subtle and rarefied form of self-enhancement, of desire for more, and a strengthening of one's conceptual identity, one's self-image. You do not become good by trying to be good, but by finding the goodness that is already within you and allowing that goodness to emerge. But it can only emerge if something fundamental changes in your state of consciousness. The history of communism, originally inspired by noble ideals, clearly illustrates what happens when people attempt to change external reality, create a new earth, without any prior change in their inner reality, their state of consciousness. They make plans without taking into account the blueprint for dysfunction that every human being carries within, the ego. All right, so I'll stop there because that's a good stopping point. So this is what it's all about. It's about the ego. So it's basically like trying to make sure that we understand that the ego is a problem, the ego is the issue, the ego is the enemy, which I get it. And for most people, that's the idea. I still disagree with that because I just understand things a little differently. But it's a good starting point because it is something that needs to be checked. And it is something that we should understand more clearly, because if we're with any tool, you don't just want to unintelligently use a hammer. You want to make sure that if you're going to use a hammer, you're using it in the way it's designed and it's serving its purpose and you're gaining an advantage by using it. But just to like allow the hammer to go like crazy and just do whatever with it is probably going to set you up for a lot of crazy drama. And not using the hammer is going to basically keep you from building your home, from building a house, from creating something that might actually serve a purpose. So let's go through some of this because I want to see what you guys are asking about with regards to this. By the way, guys, if you're tuning in because you want a reading, that was in the last hour. So this is our study group time. And so we're discussing the book, A Course in Miracles. A Course in Miracles. Jesus, I'm like back in my old day. Eckhart Tolle's A New Earth. So we're discussing that, and then we are conversing regarding like spiritual concepts and ideas and so forth as well. So let me go through here. Let me see what you guys are asking about. Sometimes I thought you were just very caffeinated. Well, I talk very fast, FYI. Like, I talk very fast because I got this way through Starbucks. Because when I was making coffee at Starbucks and I had to run the show there, I had to do everything quickly. So I was very like quick and fast. And so I'm used to being very fast and just like going through stuff quickly. I don't like taking my sweet time. I also have stuff to do. But now when I do readings, because I have only like when I do a reading, I have 30 minutes to cover a lot of details that I'm sensing, I have to go through it fairly quickly. So I have to talk really fast. And then when I do these lives, I have to talk really fast as well so I can get through more people. If I slow down or if I stop, which I know people have said, Ferny, I need you to slow down and speak slowly because we are losing you with the speed. I get it, but that's also the Hispanic in me because Hispanics speak very quickly as well. Yeah. I was like, Valentina, when Oprah was doing her series on this, I was there. I was studying with them. I was writing my notes. I was in it, girl. I was in it. Let's see, going through here. Yeah. Unity is like, this makes so much sense about the inner essence and being drawn to it. It's this calling, it's a summoning, and this is what I've talked about before. There's this inner summoning that is there, and if you will just simply sit your ass down and shut the hell up, you will feel it, you will hear it, you will sense it in one way or another. For myself, because that's all I'm used to being, is I'm used to paying attention to what's internally happening within me. When I stop processing or I stop pondering and I just shut myself off, usually when I'm falling asleep, things start popping into my head. I'm like, I'm trying to go to sleep. And so I'm trying to shut that down. But there's an inner summoning that's there. And sometimes it doesn't make sense. Sometimes it's not going to make sense. Sometimes it's going to seem very irrational or illogical. When I was back in Houston, I felt the need to come to the desert. I didn't know why. I had never been to Santa Fe, didn't think much of Santa Fe, didn't know nothing about New Mexico other than the Roswell incident. So I had no idea what was here. I had no idea what I would be encountering or dealing with when I came out here. I just knew I needed to go to the desert. So I felt this inner summoning, like, go to this trip. And it's not like every day I woke up and like there was a voice in my head that said, go to the desert. No, it was more like a thought that would pop up, and then a feeling, and then a visual, and then like seeing things that were affirming what I was feeling internally. They would come up. And so I felt this like draw out here. And I was like, okay, well, let's just go. And so I just like booked a random trip, didn't really plan it. And my partner was like, I don't know what's there. I don't want to go to the desert. And he's more like, he was worried that he wouldn't like the desert because he's more of like, I want to be near the ocean or by the beach. But I was like, I need to go to the desert and I need to go there. So I just booked the trip, came out here, and the moment we both arrived, we knew like this was it and we needed to be here. And we felt that same summoning. And he was on board with me at the same time. So I knew that I needed to be here. Didn't know why, didn't understand what that was about, didn't have any idea what it meant, but I needed to be here. And then it just got stronger and stronger. And every single time we came out here for vacation, it would just continue to like hit me harder and harder. So I just followed that instinct. I followed that drive. I now understand why, because so much has changed positively in my life just by making that change and making that move. But it was a summoning that happened within me. And you can call it intuition, but and this is what I mentioned before, is there's a purpose in each of our lives that we're meant to each of our lives has a purpose, and the purpose is to experience life and all that has been destined for you to go through and experience. Doesn't mean that every moment of your life is destined. It doesn't mean that every moment that you are living, that you're supposed to live purposefully, or you should try, but we are each here for specific reasons. There isn't just one reason. People are always asking me, what's my purpose? You're living your purpose. Your purpose is your life and all of the moments and experiences you're going to have that you are destined to have in one way or another. That doesn't mean everything's planned out and that you can't choose what you want to experience. It just means there's a lot of things that we are all each meant to go through. Some of those things may be very monotonous things. I was at Starbucks. I was only planning on being at Starbucks for 2 to 3 years, and I was ready to go. But I ended up being there for 11 or 12 years. So in that time, I was taught and I gained a lot of wisdom and knowledge and information and understanding. But I would have never gained that had I left like 2 or 3 years into it, because I was trying to control the way it might go. So there's an inner summoning, and you have to kind of listen to it. But the only way you're going to hear it, the only way you're going to feel it or know that it's there, is by sitting your ass down and shutting the hell up. Meaning, stop trying to tell God or the universe what to do, and stop trying to dominate what is happening in your life with controlling it or trying to manipulate it in some way. Mm-hmm. Mothropic Christina. I think that's how you said it. I think I said it right? It says, I'm starting to wake up and Cassidy always pushes me. I think we have the same spirit guides. No, I think, sometimes what happens is when we come in sometimes with like a joint mission with people, or a joint agreement on a soul level, that we're going to interact with people at a certain point in our lives, and that experience is going to allow us to gain something from it. And so this can happen with family members, this can happen with friends, this can happen with relationships, romantic relationships. There's a season, there's a time, and there's a season for every connection. Doesn't mean that it's meant to last forever. It serves its purpose, and then whatever will come will unravel, and then you can move on. There have been many teachers in my life that have come and gone, and people who I was much closer to in the past, or people who I may have been more engaged with in the past. That doesn't mean that I need to maintain those relationships for the entirety of my life. There are people that I connect with or stay connected to, but for the most part, I accept the fact that that is the rhythm of life. I got used to that at Starbucks, because whenever we would hire new people, and we formed our team, and I was happy and comfortable with the team, and then life would change and someone would leave or someone would come in. And so it was always heartbreaking to me when people would leave, because I was used to them and they'd become family for me. So I got used to that idea that there's people will come in and people will leave in your life. This is just the rhythm of reality and this experience in this physical form. So yeah, whenever, and like one of my closest friends, years and years ago, we're not friends anymore, but back when we were, she was one of my closest friends. When we first met, it was a destined connection. I was in the drive-thru at Starbucks, and my boss was there, and I did a lot of stuff at Starbucks that I got away with, which I probably could have gotten fired for, just because I was definitely breaking rules here and there with my behavior. But my boss, she had just gone through a divorce. She was just trying to recover herself. She had worked all day. She was exhausted, and I felt for her. And so she was in the drive-thru with me, and she was checking something in the drive-thru while I was there, and I was just rubbing her shoulders, just trying to help her feel better, because I know she was feeling tough and her back was hurting. And so I was just like rubbing her shoulders, just like giving her like, you know, here you go. Like, I'm sorry, sweetheart. I know you've been having a hard time or a hard day. Now, granted, I probably could have gotten fired for that. And if someone saw us, she probably would have been forced to fire me for that, because this is not the world we live in. This was like in the early 2000s. But in that moment, then I was giving her a massage, basically, and the woman that I knew as a friend, she came through the drive-through, and she just happened to be a massage therapist. So she also happened to have coupons for a free massage. So she was like, "Oh, it looks like you can use a massage," and my boss was like, "Yeah," and so she gave us free coupons for a massage, and we each got a free coupon. And then after that, when we first saw each other, because there was a feeling of like I recognize you or I know you somehow, but we had never ever met. But there was a feeling there that like I feel like I knew you, and the reason why is because on a soul level we do know each other from, you know, past life experiences. We did have connections, so there was a recognition there on a soul level, and then that began our friendship. But it was a synchronicity. It was an alignment of experience. And that person came in for a season, and then they came out, and then they went out. And so that happens. And that's just the norm when it comes to interacting and engaging with people. Now, granted, if you're lucky enough to hold on to a relationship or to have a connection with someone for your lifetime, that's awesome. I love that. Those stories and those ideas, the idea of having that kind of connection. But a lot of people will have people who come in and go out. That's just going to be the natural flow of things. I'm reading y'all's conversation and I was reading y'all and y'all are cracking me up. Who am I? The question to ask over and over again, over and over and over again. The question is not who am I, but what is my potential and what do I choose? Because who am I is the core being within all of us. And I believe that you can call it source, God. It's the witnessing force of creation. And so at the core of all of our beingness, this is what we all are. When I see you, there's the core exists within you. God exists within you. And you see me, God exists within me. Now, that's all there. That's a granted. So it's a given. And so then it comes down to, okay, knowing who you really are at the core, beneath the surface of the conditioning, beneath the surface of life and what it has turned you into through experiences and interactions and relationships. Now that you know who you truly are, what do you want to do with it? What do you want to do with the power you possess, with the being that you are? What do you choose to be in all of that? And that's the most important thing to ask yourself. What do you choose? Because in the moment you choose, in the moment you make a decision for what you will be, you by default unleash the power of the universe. And what you desire is no longer going to be, and there's a little bit of a for the basic things that most people desire for. Oh, I want more money, or I want more this, or I want more that. But that's surface level living. That's a surface level experience. Beyond that, what else do you desire? And this is what we're seeing right now in a lot of communities around the world. You know, this is you may be seeing the news headlines where people are quitting their jobs in large quantities. People do not want to go back to these remedial jobs or these jobs where they're treated like garbage and they get nothing in return. The idea of busting your ass every day for just a few bucks to pay your bill and then do it all over again, that's not living. That is a form of slavery in some ways. Granted, we all have bills to pay and we all have ways of making money to pay those bills. But when you're at the bottom of the totem pole and you are basically like you're the service industry, which is where all this is happening at right now, is there's a huge issue going on with the service industry. People had an opportunity during COVID, during 2020, to take a break or to breathe and realize what life is all about. And so though some of those people weren't able to earn a living and may have had to find other ways to survive, there were a lot of people who were able to sustain themselves or keep themselves alive and were able to take a break. When you have that experience and you take a break from the everyday hustle and bustle of what you believe is how it's supposed to be, all of a sudden you realize there's more to life than just clocking in, clocking out, being bitched at by an unruly customer, and being treated as if you're a servant for a few bucks that aren't enough to survive off of and to really have a life. And so that's a huge discord that is happening. And now there is a conscious awakening happening on a global scale, because this is not just something we're seeing in this country. This is something happening in various areas around the world, where people are realizing there's more to life than just that. There's more to it than just that. And so at this point, people in a superficial way, because I still think there's a superficiality to it, but there's a superficiality to the idea that I'm more than just this thing that I'm doing for a living. I'm more than just that. And there's more to experience in this reality than just that. And I don't want to subject myself to just that. If I go back to that, then I can't. And I understand that I specifically understand that, because in having been able to get out of that industry, to build my own business, to be my own boss, to call my own hours, and to work in the way that I choose to, I know that I cannot go back to doing that. I know I can't go back to living that way or operating that way. It's just not something I am prepared to do. And so I mean, even in I wonder, like, oh my God, I wonder if, let's say one day my business collapses and I no longer have clients, what am I going to do? And so I can't even fathom going back to that reality. And so now you have a large amount of people who are having that same realization. So at this point, our civilization is being forced to change in ways that people did not expect would happen so quickly. Because the thing about it is, we don't have to subject people to those kinds of jobs. We don't have to subject people to those kinds of experiences every single day. Now, if you live in a world where capitalism is the primary mode of operation, then it's a requirement, because you have to have a serving force. You have to have people who are at the bottom of the totem pole to be able to prop up or to maintain that system. But if you get smart enough, you can decide to maybe change the dynamics or change what's most important. And buying and consumerism is not the most important thing. Surviving is important. Health and wellness is important. Basic needs are important, but there's more to life than that. Those are just the basic things. And so once you get past the basic things, once you start having food, you have shelter, and you have some sort of well-being, even if it's just, some form of well-being, at that point, then, and if you're not having to work for it anymore, and you've received some sort of experience where you've been given that or had that for free, it's a radical shift in, like, why am I busting my ass when this could have been the case all along? If our government or if our leaders could have been doing this all along, why are they not doing it on a regular basis? Why are we being subjected to this reality? And people want more for themselves. And so people who are at the top, or people who are in higher roles or positions, people who are in entitled positions like myself, I'm in an entitled situation at this point in my life. We cannot judge those people. We cannot blame those people for being in that state, for being in that mindset, because that's an awakening that's happening there. And I get it, because I've been there and I know what that's about. And so there has to be a different way. And that's what's happening right now, is we're in a place in our reality and world where we're grappling with how do we move forward, because we can't go back. And what we thought we could get back going isn't really happening the way that we expected. And trying to force that system back into working mode is not happening. What can we do differently? This is where a lot of bigger shifts are going to have to take place, because you can either go with the flow, go with the trend, and try to line up with how things are moving, or you can fight against it, butt up against it. And right now it looks like they're trying to butt up against it. They're trying to fight that momentum. Unfortunately, it's a wave, and it is only just a small boat that is trying to, chuck along against the current, but the current is huge. It's a wave, it's a tsunami. And so we are gonna have to change. So this is what we're going to have to do, is understand that we are all entitled to a decent, safe, and stable life. That doesn't mean that we should all receive millions of dollars a year as an individual, but it does mean that we're in a position as a country and as a world, in many instances, to support our own, to take care of each other, to take care of ourselves. And that's not a pipe dream. That is not a fantasy. That is not an idea that that means it's the end of everything. It's just simply a necessity that we're finally starting to realize, that we're starting to finally accept, that is needing to be addressed. And so we don't have the choice of ignoring it. And if we try to ignore it, which is what we're doing right now on a collective scale, it's just going to bite us all in the ass, and we're all going to be dealing with the consequences of that, whether we choose to go along with it or not. And so this is where we're at in the world right now. We're being forced to change. And the interesting thing is that we are in a position as a world to be able to do this for ourselves and as a collective. Now that we have robotics, now that we have a lot of automation and automated systems, it would be easier to support the populations of this world by simply giving them the basic needs and creating a system that maintains that, because that produces a lot more opportunities. There are people who dream about being engineers or who want to design new robotics, but they're too busy busting their asses at Starbucks and they have no energy left to come up and invent that. And so we're throwing away a lot of resources and people by forcing ourselves to be subjected to these remedial roles and gigs and jobs, etc. So, and these bigger companies who, like McDonald's, they're getting on board. They're like, this is not looking like we're going to get our workforce back the way we thought. We need to switch over to robotics or automation. Well, okay, go for it. Because, if that's the case and that's the case, go for it. So it's whatever's necessary to stabilize systems and to get everything to where people can have the opportunity to have a decent life instead of just being servants their entire lives. This is a caste issue. This is an issue of value and worth. And we as human beings, we have value and worth. But some of us don't believe so. Some of us don't think that. Some of us base that value and worth on what a person has done or what they've produced or who they are or their education. But you already have value and worth without those things. And so we have to get over it, because the reality is we all deserve to be here, and we are all here. So we need to basically realize that and then make changes. That's what it's about, right? Really, ego is not a totally bad thing, but there is a fine line. There is. With anything else, it's a fine line. Barbara she says, they make plans without taking into action the blueprint for dysfunction that every human being carries within the ego. That is the summation of all organized religion for me. Religion can be a tool, just like the ego. It can also be a weapon. Unfortunately, in the majority of our history, it's been used as a weapon. And so, because there are a lot of people who continue to use it as a weapon and as a way to have power or dominance, or to receive a benefit through that. They call it God's blessing. I call it a diluted way of taking advantage of the creation. That's what I call it. I actually call it the opposite. I call it blasphemous, because you're basically going against the creation to single yourself out as the only one deserving of. And then you have people propping you up by donating their money and giving their money or tithing, etc. So, but with religion is supposed to help people have a pathway to God in a way that they can understand and they can gain from that relationship. And it's not used that way. Most people use religion as a weapon, and is still used as a weapon to this very day. and they will use God. They will speak in God's name in a way that is coming from a place of fear and dominance. That's how you know that they are misusing the being of God, because God is not trying to dominate any of us in our lives. God is a witness of life. God is a co-creator, not the dominating force of all things. And people get all confused with that. Yeah. All right, guys, I'm coming to the end of my time here. Let me see what. Yeah, well, Monica, yeah, and Monica P4, she says, I am a in-home caregiver for little, but my goal is to become a hospice nurse. This job is giving me the flexibility to focus on school to get to my goal. The rule, don't drag my feet, move forward. Yeah, I mean, we always have to build ourselves up, right? There's always a way to achieve our goals. In the system and society we live in, we definitely have to utilize that system and do it through that system, because that's how it's been set up. I didn't come to be who I am today and to get to the life that I have today without having to bust my ass and work for Starbucks for all those years, or be a telemarketer at some point. I was a telemarketer for a while. I was also a front desk receptionist for a place where they found people. What is the work source? I was that as well. There were several jobs that I've had in my lifetime. But all of those served a purpose. They gave me an opportunity to learn something, and there were experiences that I value, I cherish. That doesn't mean that I think everybody should have to like bust their ass and like almost get to the point where they burn out just to survive. I think that's just too much to ask of people. But yeah, there's goals that you have that you work towards, right? Like, right now what I'm doing here, even though I look forward to these every single week, this is practice for me, because I plan on doing this with larger groups of people, and I plan on doing this a lot longer than just Wednesdays and Fridays. So I use my opportunity to connect with you guys as practice so that I can get more comfortable and better with expressing myself, with speaking on things, with expressing the concepts and the ideas and that which I have learned myself. I use this as an opportunity, but I'm also doing it because I wish to give. And so even though I'm not waiting to be at an ideal point in my life, I'm not waiting to be this ideal version of myself to do it, I am doing it with warts and all. And that's what it's about. If you want to really move in the direction of your goal, then do it regardless of your circumstances. Find a way to do it so that you are able to express it, and you are able to participate, and you are able to engage in that, and do it in a way so that you can feel that energy, and you can align with that force. And so for myself, rereading this book, I have tons of books, and there's still some that I haven't read yet, just because they've been sitting there. And so I'm like, well, what better way to do it than to grab a book and read it with an audience and share and talk about it, and use that opportunity to gain the knowledge myself in the process as well, if I don't already know it. And so even though I do read books that I'm familiar with, I've already read some of these, there's some of them that I haven't read yet, or there's some of them that I'm going to do with you guys that I haven't engaged with yet. These are all opportunities that I'm utilizing to my advantage, and I have goals. I have things that I want to do, and I'm working on them. I'm working on those goals. I'm doing that besides the work that I do every single day. So yeah, take the little steps, but you have to you stop. People have a tendency of like making things bigger than they have to be. We tend to like amplify the size of something or the effort it will take to do something. I had I had a person that used to work for me back at Starbucks, and she was like, I want to be a singer. And I'm like, are you okay? Do you want to be a singer or do you want to be famous? Because being a singer and being famous are two different things. What do you want? And she was like, well, I kind of want to be famous. And I'm like, okay, then you don't really want to be a singer. She's like, no, I enjoy singing. I'm like, then why aren't you singing? Well, because I want to be. And so she was stuck in her head going back and forth, back and forth. I'm like, look, if you want to be a singer, be a damn singer. You can sing in the parking lot. You can sing at church. You can sing and, get a bunch of people together once a week and have like a talent night in your house, whatever it takes. But sing, and sing as often as you can. Get online and sing. Make a video and sing. No one is keeping you from singing if that is what you desire. But sing and do it so that it is authentic and that it is genuine and it is coming from a place of truth. If you want to be famous, that's a whole different story. Then you really don't want to be a singer. You want attention. You want to feel special, which means you don't feel good about yourself. You lack worth. You lack a sense of value. And at some point in your life, someone either put you through something and you believed that, or they told you and you believed them, and you have yet to change that within yourself. So if you want to be famous, then fame is not the best way to resolve or heal that within yourself. You have to find a different way to do it. And so she had to go through this whole process, because this was basically forcing her to kind of think about things in a completely different way. And she had already been working on being a singer for several years. So after we talked, she stopped singing for a while and tried to figure herself out and was trying to understand who she really was and what she was really here to do. Then she started singing again, but it was because she wanted to sing, not because she was trying to do or be someone in this world. And that's what I would say. If you want to do this, then do this. I have people who are students in developing their psychic and mediumship abilities, and this is the perpetual loop that they get stuck in. They buy a program, they do it or do it half-assed, and then they expect immediate results. They don't get it. They're not the perfect psychic or medium. So then they buy another program, or they take another course, or they read another book, or they buy another book, or they do this. And they constantly are in this loop of, I bought this. This should be my one key and simple trick to switch it on and be perfect this. And it didn't work. Let me try something else. Let me try something else. Let me try something else. And I'm just like, stop with all the excess buying. Stop with all the things you think you need to do this. Stop with all the hoops you're putting yourself through. Sit your ass down. Practice your ability. Practice using your senses. This is how we're going to practice. And then once I get them to start practicing and it becomes an ongoing regular thing, then they actually start to notice that something is shifting and changing with them. It may be slow to start at first, but once they start to give the work, the effort and the time it deserves, and it's happening consistently or regularly, they start to realize that there's some things starting to change within themselves. They start to realize they're becoming more sensitive. They're becoming more psychic. It's not happening with like a switch. It's not happening overnight. It's happening gradually over time. I'm planning on doing a video of me watching myself do my very first on-camera reading, which was like 5 or 6 years ago. And back then I was still using cards. I was still using tarot cards, but I want to show y'all what it was like for me back then versus today. And the reason why I'm the way I am today is because I worked and worked and worked on just doing it, not on thinking it into reality or trying to be this epitome of it. I just practiced it and did the work. Do the work, you will get to your goal, but do the work, guys. Just do the work and focus on the activity, on the small steps it takes. It's like, it's not like I did 5 readings and I was able to do this. I mean, literally last year I did, 1,400 appointments, 1,400 readings last year, or appointments. And that's not including all of the e-readings. That's not including all of the lives that I did. So I did a lot of practice last year. I consider it practice because, I'm never going to stop learning. I'm never going to stop developing my abilities. But that's how much I put into it last year because it means something to me. And so if you want to be a singer, don't sing once in a year and then call it a day. Bust your ass and try to sing as often as you can, 3-4 times a month if you can, and find ways to do it. And then you will see something shift. Then you will see something starting to transform within you. Then you'll start to align yourself to that which you have desired, but have been waiting for something to occur so that you could have it. Okay. All right, guys, I love you all. I'm out of time. I will be back on Friday for our other book. What is the other book? I think it's still Conversation. Is it still Conversations? No, it's the other book. We changed that one too as well. I got to remember what the hell I picked. Anyways, I love you all.